Now, let us begin by entering, for just a moment, into a silence within ourselves, not the silence of forced quiet, but the inner stillness in which truth announces itself. For unless we become receptive, unless we become still, we cannot hear the gentle whisper of the Spirit that reveals our true identity. And it is this identity that has been misunderstood, misrepresented, and hidden beneath centuries of fear, guilt, and human belief. For generations we have been taught to see ourselves as sinners, separate, unworthy, forever trying to win the favor of a God who appears distant and withholding. My friends, this belief did not come from God. It came from the human mind, from a sense of separation that never existed in truth. There is no place in the infinite activity of God where a sinner can be found. There is no such being in the kingdom of God. There is only the child of God, pure, whole, and untouched by anything the human mind calls sin. The tragedy of the sinner concept is not merely that it fills individuals with shame, but that it blinds them to the presence already within. It makes one search outward for forgiveness, outward for redemption, outward for a God who can only be found at the center of one's own being. And so today, let us lay aside, even if only for a moment, the entire mental burden of unworthiness. Let us release the centuries-old conditioning that tells us we must climb some ladder of moral improvement in order to be accepted. God is not withholding anything from you. God is not waiting for you to become better, holier, purer. God is simply waiting to be recognized as the very life of your being. You see, when we accept the label of sinner, we accept a false identity. We accept a selfhood apart from God. And the moment we do that, we step into a life of effort, struggle, guilt, and fear. But when we awaken, when the veil lifts even slightly, we discover that we were never separate to begin with. We discover that identity is not something we earn, it is something we are. In this hour, we are not here to improve the human self or to polish its virtues. We are here to behold the truth that has been true from the beginning, that the soul within you is the offspring of God, that the spirit within you is one with the infinite, that your true identity is the Christ God expressing as individual being. And if this is so, and it is, then the entire concept of the sinner melts away like a shadow vanishing in the presence of light. So today, I invite you into a new way of seeing. Not self-condemnation, not striving, not pleading with a God you believe is distant, but quiet recognition. Recognition that the same Spirit that animated the life of Jesus, the same presence that formed the worlds, the same love that sustains all creation, this is the very essence of your being. And the purpose of this class is to bring that recognition into your consciousness so clearly, so gently, so deeply, that you may walk free of the old identity and rest in the truth of your divine sonship. Let us move more deeply now into this great truth. For unless we understand the nature of the lie, we cannot awaken to the nature of the self. The entire burden of human experience rests upon one fundamental misconception, the belief that we exist as beings separate and apart from God. This belief is the foundation of the so-called sinner identity, but it is also the root of every fear, every limitation, every discord that has ever appeared in our lives. And yet, my friends, it is a belief without substance, a dream accepted as reality simply because the world has agreed upon it. You see, the human mind, the mind that judges, fears, condemns, remembers offenses, imagines a future, and clings to the past, that mind can never know its own source, it can never comprehend the nature of God, because it is but the mechanism of the personal sense of self. The human mind is not the instrument of realization. It is the veil that obscures it. And so long as we attempt to understand spiritual truth through the intellect, we will remain in the bondage of contradiction. The separation we feel is not an actual condition. It is a state of awareness, darkness. It is the sleep of forgetting what we are. Just as a man who dreams he is drowning awakens to find himself safe in his bed, so too do we awaken to discover that the entire drama of separation existed only in the dream of the personal mind. The human self, the one burdened with guilt, striving for improvement, frightened by its own inadequacy, is not the self that God created. It is a construct of thought, inherited from centuries of conditioning. It lives by reaction, by fear, by desire, by the belief in two powers, good and evil, God and the world, spirit and matter. And as long as we identify with that self, we must live under the law of duality. But listen closely. Nothing the human self attempts can bring it into union with God, because union already exists. The work is not to become one with God. The work is to awaken to the oneness that has never been broken. The sinner identity cannot awaken. Only the Christ can awaken. The frightened self cannot lift itself into spiritual vision. Only the spirit within can reveal the truth of its own nature. This is why when Jesus said, "I can of mine own self do nothing," he was revealing the great mystical secret. There is no power in the human mind to know God. It is not equipped for that. It is not designed for that. The human mind belongs to the world of effect, whereas spiritual realization belongs to the realm of cause. And until we relinquish trust in the human mind, in its schemes and judgments, we cannot hear the still small voice that whispers, "Thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." The sense of separation, then, is not something we must overcome. It is something we must stop believing in. It is the acceptance of a false identity that must fall away, not by effort, but by recognition. When we see that the sinner self is nothing more than a misperception, we begin to sense another presence behind the mask, a deeper life flowing beneath the thoughts, a quiet eye that has never been afraid, never been guilty, never been apart. In this recognition, the entire structure of separation crumbles, and as it crumbles, a new light begins to dawn, the light of spirit, the awareness of oneness, the realization that God has never been distant, and you have never been other than the expression of His own being. There comes a moment in the life of every earnest seeker, a moment that is not announced by trumpets nor accompanied by any outward sign, when something within begins to loosen its grip upon the old identity. Perhaps it arrives in a moment of weariness, perhaps through deep silence, perhaps in the midst of great difficulty. But however it comes, it is unmistakable. It is the dawning realization that the personal self, with all its striving and struggling, has never been the real doer of anything. And when this dawns, even faintly, a profound turning takes place in consciousness. In this recognition, the entire structure of separation crumbles, and as it crumbles, a new light begins to dawn, the light of spirit, the awareness of oneness, the realization that God has never been distant, and you have never been other than the expression of His own being. It is like trying to lift oneself by one's own bootstraps. This dawning recognition is the turning point. For the first time, we glimpse the meaning of the words, "I can of mine own self do nothing." And if we sit quietly with that statement, not rushing to interpret it, not resisting it, but simply allowing it to penetrate, we experience a freedom the human self has never known. For in recognizing that the personal self can do nothing, we are simultaneously recognizing that something else, something deeper, something eternal, must be the true life of us. At this moment, the old identity begins to fade. The I that was anxious, the I that felt guilty, the I that tried to be better, begins to dissolve like mist in sunlight. You may notice a lightness, a silence, or simply a release from the compulsion to fix yourself or justify yourself. This is not passivity. It is the emergence of a new center of being, a center not located in the mind but in the spirit. It is here that many become frightened, for the ego interprets dissolution as death. But I tell you, this is not death, it is birth. It is the birth of the true self, the Christ self, rising within your own consciousness. And as this new awareness begins to unfold, one notices something beautiful. The struggle to reach God is replaced by the recognition that God has always been reaching you. This turning point does not come through reading or study alone. It comes through receptivity, through the quiet willingness to let go of the belief that your life is sustained, directed, or redeemed by human means. It comes when you stop trying to become spiritual and instead yield to the truth that spirituality is the very essence of your being. In this new light, you begin to understand that all your efforts to be good, all your attempts to earn grace, were based on the false idea that God was outside of you. And when that belief falls away, you discover that the divine presence is not something you reach, it is something you reveal. This is the turning point. When the sinner identity begins to crumble and the child of God begins to appear, when the facade of personal power dissolves and the true power, the Father within, comes into view, when prayer is no longer supplication but listening, when life is no longer struggle but unfolding, when you cease trying to live your life and allow life to live itself as you, and once this turning has begun, once this inner shift has taken root, the path forward is no longer a matter of effort. It becomes a matter of surrender, of recognition, of quiet and steady awareness of the presence that now stirs within. Now we come to the sacred moment, the moment upon which the entire spiritual journey turns. For once the personal sense of identity loosens its hold, even slightly, something wholly new begins to reveal itself. Not through human thought, not through imagination, not through mental effort, but through the quiet operation of grace. It is the revelation of the Christ identity as your very self. And I tell you, nothing in the outer world can compare to this recognition. No achievement, no attainment, no human joy approaches the wonder of discovering who you truly are. Let us understand what takes place here. We are not discovering a new self. We are not receiving a new nature. We are simply awakening to what has always been the truth of our being. The Christ identity is not an attainment. It is a revelation. It is the uncovering of that which has forever existed at the core of our being, hidden only by the belief that we were something else. The Christ is not a person. Do not make that mistake. The Christ is the divine consciousness, individualized as you. It is the light that was in the beginning, the presence that speaks through the silence, the life that animates every living soul. When we speak of the Christ, we speak not of someone who walked the hills of Galilee 2,000 years ago, but of the eternal I that has been alive in you since before time. And it is this I, this spiritual I, that begins to make itself known when the personal I grows quiet. You will not hear it with physical ears, nor will you see it with physical eyes. You will feel it as a presence. You will sense it as a depth. You will recognize it as the essence of your being that has never been frightened, never been guilty, never been wounded, never been separate. In this holy revelation, something astonishing happens. You begin to see that the self you feared, the self you condemned, the self you struggled to improve, was never the self that God created. It was a shadow, a mistaken identity. And as the Christ identity dawns, the shadow dissolves. No battle is needed, no struggle is required. The sunlight does not fight the darkness, it simply shines, and darkness cannot remain. When this recognition begins to unfold, life takes on a new meaning. You feel a presence going before you. You sense a wisdom not your own directing your steps. You notice a peace that does not arise from circumstances, but from the deep realization that you are no longer living as a separate, struggling, frightened being. You are living as the transparency through which the divine love reveals itself. The revelation is not dramatic. It is not emotional. It is quiet. It is gentle. It is felt as a subtle shift in the inner atmosphere, a soft recognition. Ah, I am not what I thought I was. There is something within me that is eternal. There is something within me that is divine. And as this awareness grows, you begin to understand the words, before Abraham was, I am. You begin to see that your true identity is not born of flesh, nor shaped by human experience. It is not subject to age, to time, to disease, or to limitation. It is the eternal expression of the infinite pure spirit, unchanging and undivided. This is why Goldsmit taught that healing, supply, peace, harmony, these are not demonstrations you achieve. They are the natural unfoldments of recognizing your true identity. When you know yourself as the Christ, you stop feeling needy, you stop begging, you stop fearing, you stop asking for life to be different. Instead, life begins to reveal itself from within through the activity of the presence that has taken its rightful place at the center of your awareness. In this revelation, prayer becomes listening, healing becomes seeing, living becomes abiding. You are no longer a sinner reaching for God. You are the child of God through whom God expresses. You are the instrument through which love reveals its own infinite nature. And the more you rest in this recognition, the more the Christ lives your life for you. This is the turning of water into wine, the transformation of human selfhood into spiritual identity. It is the moment in which your entire life begins to unfold from within, through grace, rather than from without, through effort. And from here forward, everything changes, not because you have changed yourself, but because you have awakened to the self that never needed changing. When the revelation of your true identity begins to take form within you, something subtle but profound occurs. Life itself changes, not because the world has altered, but because you are no longer approaching it from the standpoint of a separate self. You are no longer meeting experience as a sinner in need of forgiveness, nor as a struggler battling conditions, nor as a mind attempting to manipulate circumstances. You begin to live as one who knows, perhaps only faintly at first, yet unmistakably, that you are the child of God, the offspring of the infinite, the expression of a presence that cannot be wounded, diminished, or deprived. This shift does not take place with fanfare. It does not announce itself outwardly, but something inwardly settles. Something relaxes. Something that has been tense for years, sometimes for lifetimes, begins to loosen. The burden of self-improvement lifts. The strain of proving yourself fades. The fear of punishment dissolves. For in the awareness of sonship, you realize that there is nothing to atone for, nothing to earn, nothing to fix. You begin to understand that the entire drama of guilt and redemption belongs only to the realm of the personal mind, and that the spirit within you has never participated in it. Now observe the changes that follow. Where once relationships were fraught with fear, sensitivity, and conflict, a new gentleness emerges. You begin to see others not as struggling sinners, not as threats, not as sources of harm or disappointment, but as fellow expressions of the same divine life. You cannot hold resentment while recognizing the Christ in another. You cannot fear those in whom you see the presence. And so, without effort, forgiveness arises not as an act of the will, but as the natural fragrance of recognizing the truth. In your affairs, too, transformation begins supply, which once seemed dependent on effort, strategy, or struggle, takes on a different character. It begins to unfold as spiritual provision coming from directions you could not have imagined, arriving without strain, maintaining itself without anxiety. Why? Because the child of God lives by grace, and grace does not depend on human merit or human planning. Grace is the natural outflow of oneness with the infinite source. Likewise, the body responds to this shift. When you no longer identify as a guilty, fearful, condemned being, the tensions that produce illness begin to dissolve. Healing does not come as a miracle performed upon you or as a reward for faith. Healing comes because the false sense of self that produced fear, guilt, and resistance has been replaced by an awareness of harmony, peace, and spiritual identity. The body becomes an instrument of expression, not a battlefield of conflict. You may also notice that your responses to life change. Where once you reacted to appearances with fear, anger, or urgency, now there arises a stillness, a pause within which the presence makes itself known. You begin to live from the center, not the surface. You begin to respond from spirit, not from emotion. You begin to move through life guided rather than driven. And this guidance does not come as dramatic visions or mystical signs. It comes quietly, gently, through intuition, through inner knowing, through the simple awareness of the next right step. All of this is possible because the fundamental belief that you are a separate, guilty self has dissolved. You are no longer trying to earn your place in the kingdom. You are beginning to realize that you never left it. You are no longer trying to become holy. You are recognizing that holiness is the nature of your being. You are no longer praying to a distant God. You are living from the God that is your life. And the beauty of this transformation is that it does not depend on outer conditions. It does not matter whether your circumstances remain the same for a time. It does not matter whether the world acknowledges your growth. The transformation takes place in consciousness, and as consciousness expands into the realization of oneness, the outer world inevitably mirrors this inner change. Harmony begins to appear, not because you forced it, but because harmony is the nature of the Christ within you. Thus, the old identity dissolves, and a new way of being emerges effortless, graceful, quiet, yet infinitely powerful. You live now not as a sinner trying to reach God, but as the child of God through whom God expresses its love, its intelligence, its abundance, and its peace. And this, my friends, is the beginning of true freedom, the freedom that comes not from changing the world, but from knowing who you are in the midst of it. Now that we have seen the beginnings of transformation that arise when the false sense of identity loosens, let us turn to what may be called practice. But I must remind you, practice in the infinite way is not a method for gaining something, nor is it a technique by which you change the world or even change yourself. Practice, as we use the word, is simply the art of recognition, the steady returning of your attention to the truth of your being until the truth lives you, breathes you, moves you, and expresses itself as you. We are not adding anything to you. We are uncovering that which is already present. The Christ identity does not need to be developed. It needs to be recognized. It does not need to be strengthened. It needs to be acknowledged. And so our practice is not effort, it is remembrance. Let us begin with inner listening. Every day, indeed, many times a day, allow yourself a moment in which you turn inward, away from the noise of the world and the chatter of the mind, and rest in stillness. Do not seek a message. Do not try to hear words. Do not attempt to receive guidance. Simply be still and know. This knowing is not intellectual. It is a felt awareness of presence. It is the quiet recognition Here within me is the life of God. Now that we have seen the beginnings of transformation that arise when the false sense of identity loosens, let us turn to what may be called practice. But I must remind you, practice in the infinite way is not a method for gaining something, nor is it a technique by which you change the world or even change yourself. Next comes the practice of identity. Throughout the day, gently remind yourself, not as affirmation, not as repetition, but as recognition who you truly are. When fear comes, acknowledge, this fear is not mine, for the I that I am is spirit. When lack appears, recognize, this appearance has no power over the Christ that I am. When confronted with conflict, quietly remember, the presence within me is the presence within all. These are not words used to change the outer picture. They are openings in consciousness through which the deeper realization dawns that you are not the outer human trying to manage life, but the inner Christ expressing itself through experience. Let me remind you also of the practice of non-reactivity. The outer human self reacts. The inner Christ responds. Whenever possible, do not meet the world with impulsive judgment, emotion, or fear. Instead, pause, even for a breath, and allow the inner presence to rise. That pause is the doorway through which grace enters. That pause is the space in which the human mind yields to the divine mind. In this practice, you will find that your life becomes less noisy, not because the world has changed, but because you no longer live from the surface. You begin to dwell in the center, in the place where God is known, and from that center, the world appears differently. There is also the practice of seeing. See the Christ in others, not by forcing yourself to think loving thoughts, but by recognizing that the same life that animates you animates everyone. When someone appears as adversary or stranger, quietly say within yourself, behind this appearance is the same presence that lives in me. This recognition does not change them, it reveals you. It brings you into alignment with the truth, and in that alignment, discord dissolves. Now, some will ask, how long must I practice? As long as you believe yourself to be an outer human, practice is necessary. But as recognition deepens, you will find that practice becomes effortless. It becomes your natural state. You live more frequently from the awareness of the inner Christ and less from the demands of the personal self. The shift happens gradually at times and suddenly at others. But it happens. It must happen, because it is not your effort that accomplishes it. It is the nature of truth revealing itself. Remember always that practice is not striving. It is surrender. It is not asking, it is listening. It is not achieving, it is recognizing. And as you continue in this gentle remembrance, the Christ identity will begin to shine through you, not as something you do, but as what you are. As this inner practice becomes natural, as you return again and again to the quiet recognition of the presence within, something deeper begins to occur, something that cannot be forced, cannot be hurried, and cannot be achieved by any human effort. It is the gradual and sometimes sudden disappearance of the old identity. The sinner self, the personal sense of me, loses its solidity. It becomes transparent. It no longer holds the authority it once had over your thoughts, your emotions, or your experience. In this deepening, the belief that you are a separate, struggling being fades like the echo of a dream you no longer quite remember. This is not an experience of dramatic visions or emotional intensity. It is rather a quiet realization that the one you thought you were, the one you tried to improve, defend, justify, correct, or condemn, has no real substance. You begin to see that the personal self was never the self at all. It was merely a mistaken belief, a shadow formed by ignorance. The moment this is seen, even faintly, the shadow begins to vanish, not by battle, not by prayer for deliverance, but by the simple dawning of light. It is here that many students ask, what do I do when old patterns return? What do I do when fear resurfaces or when old emotions arise? And the answer is beautifully simple. Do nothing. Do not fight them. Do not push them away. Do not claim them as your own, for they do not arise in the Christ. They arise in the remnants of the old identity, and their appearance is merely the indication that the deeper self is making itself known, dissolving that which never truly belonged to you. You are not responsible for erasing these patterns. You are responsible only for recognizing that they do not define you. Let them pass like clouds across the sky of your consciousness. Do not identify with them. Do not follow them. Stand still. In your stillness, in your non-reaction, the sinner identity fades. As this process continues, something even more beautiful occurs. You begin to feel the presence as your very self, not as something you touch occasionally in meditation, not as an experience that comes and goes, but as the essence of your being. A quiet joy appears unattached to circumstances. A profound peace arises independent of conditions. A sense of inner stability emerges so anchored that no storm of emotion, no surge of fear, no outer circumstance can shake it. This is not because you have become stronger. It is because the you that could be shaken is dissolving. The child of God is emerging, and the child of God does not live by the world's law. The child of God is sustained by grace, guided from within, protected not by outer defenses, but by the very nature of divine presence. You may notice that in this deepening, the need to control life diminishes. The compulsion to explain yourself, to justify yourself, to prove yourself in subtle ways or obvious ones loses its force. Why? Because the self that demanded validation is no longer the one living your life. You begin to feel, perhaps for the first time, that life is living you, that love is expressing itself as you. That wisdom is guiding your steps. This deepening also brings with it a new humility, not the humility of unworthiness, but the humility of truth, the recognition that I, the personal I, can do nothing, because the personal I is not the one who lives. The only I that truly exists is the I of God, the I of Christ, the I that is infinite, eternal, complete. When this is seen, the sinner identity falls away naturally. There is no more room for self-condemnation when you understand that the self you once condemned was never yourself at all. And as the sinner identity dissolves, you begin to live with an ease you may never have known. You begin to relax into the simple, profound truth. I live, yet not I. Christ liveth as me. In this realization, life becomes harmonious, not because challenges vanish, but because you no longer meet them as a vulnerable, separate self. You meet them as the transparency through which the presence expresses itself. And in that realization, even the challenges become opportunities to rest more deeply in the truth of who you are. This is the deepening, the quiet, effortless disappearance of the false, and the gentle, luminous appearing of the real. Not two selves battling, but one self revealing itself as the only self there is. As this deepening unfolds, as the old identity dissolves, and the awareness of your true sonship becomes the ground from which you live, you will find that the world begins to respond to you in ways that may seem mysterious. even miraculous, when viewed from the standpoint of the personal mind. But remember, these are not miracles. They are the natural effects of a consciousness aligned with its source. They are the fruit of living as the child of God rather than the sinner of the world. This deepening also brings with it a new humility, not the humility of unworthiness, but the humility of truth, the recognition that I, the personal I, can do nothing, because the personal I is not the one who lives. The only I that truly exists is the I of God, the I of Christ, the I that is infinite, eternal, complete. When this is seen, the sinner identity falls away naturally. People will say, I feel peaceful when you're near, or I don't know why, but I can talk to you. And they will not realize that they are responding not to your personality, but to the Christ shining through your transparency. In your relationships, you will notice that conflict begins to lose its hold. Arguments that once ignited easily now dissipate before they take form. Why? Because resistance can find nothing in you to cling to. The Christ in you does not react, does not defend, does not retaliate, and without reaction, conflict has no life. The sinner identity always resisted. The child of God simply sees, beholds, forgives, and understands. And in that non-resistance, harmony blossoms where discord once grew. In your work or daily activities, you will discover that opportunities arise without your seeking them. People are drawn to the peace you radiate. They sense integrity, wisdom, stability, not as traits of human character, but as the quiet fruits of a consciousness grounded in spirit. You may find that solutions come more swiftly, not because you think more cleverly, but because your mind is no longer cluttered with fear and self-concern. Intuition flows, guidance appears, and actions unfold with grace. This is the activity of the presence, not the effort of the human mind. Even your environment responds. You may walk into rooms where tension dominates and feel the atmosphere shift without your uttering a word. Animals, children, and sensitive souls feel at ease near you because they respond instinctively to the inner peace that radiates from you. You will see that the world does not change because you try to change it. It changes because you are no longer meeting it through the lens of a separate identity. You are meeting it through the recognition that all life is one, life appearing in infinite forms. Supply becomes a different experience as well. You cease to chase after it, and it ceases to run from you. As Goldsmit taught, supply is not something you get, it is something you reveal. And as you live from the truth of your oneness with the infinite, supply flows naturally from unexpected places, in perfect timing, and with no sense of strain. The child of God does not wonder where his bread will come from, for he lives in the consciousness that all that the Father hath is forever pouring through him. Perhaps one of the most beautiful fruits of this realization is the freedom from fear, not because danger has vanished from the world, but because you no longer live as the one who can be harmed. You know that you are the life of God expressing itself, and in that realization, fear loses its power. You walk in the world with a quiet confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, but the calm assurance that you are upheld by an invisible presence that goes before you, prepares the way, and surrounds you. And what shall we say of the effect on those around you? They will not always understand what has changed, but they will sense that something in you blesses them. They may come to you for comfort without knowing why. They may ask for counsel without realizing that they are seeking not your wisdom, but the presence that speaks through you. You become, without intention, a beacon, a light not of your own making, but of God shining through a consciousness that no longer blocks it. This is why Goldsmith often said that the greatest service you can render the world is the transformation of your own consciousness. When you live as the child of God, your very presence becomes a healing influence. You uplift without speaking. You calm without effort. You heal without trying. For you have ceased to live as a separate self, and the world responds to the Christ as naturally as flowers turn toward light. This is the fruit of sonship. Not a reward, not a prize, but the inevitable expression of a consciousness that knows its source. And as this fruit appears in your life, you will understand deeply, silently, that God's child is not something you became. It is what you have always been. And the world is simply recognizing what has at last been revealed. And now, as we come to the close of this time together, let us rest again in the simplicity of truth, not the truth that the human mind seeks, not the truth that is argued about or defended, but the truth that is felt in the quiet depths of one's being, the truth that dissolves all fear, all guilt, all sense of separation. It is the truth of who you are, the truth of who you have always been, the child of God, the living expression of the infinite, the embodiment of a presence that cannot be tarnished, diminished, or lost. All that has been said here today is not given for the purpose of acquiring knowledge. It is given so that something within you may awaken, something that has slept beneath years of conditioning and centuries of inherited belief. You do not need to become spiritual, for spirituality is the essence of your being. You do not need to reach God, for God is the life that breathes you. You do not need to purify yourself, for the self that God created needs no purification. What is needed is only recognition, gentle, steady, quiet recognition of the presence that has never left you. Let this truth take root. There is no sinner sitting here. There never has been. There has been only a mistaken identity, a false concept, a shadow formed by ignorance of one's source. But shadows have no substance. The moment you turn toward the light, the shadows dissolve of themselves, and so it is with the sinner identity. It falls away the instant you recognize that your true identity is the Christ of God, eternal, whole, complete. From this day forward, allow self-condemnation to have no place in your consciousness. You cannot condemn a shadow and make it real. You cannot condemn yourself without condemning an illusion. Instead, behold yourself as God beholds you, pure, innocent, one with the Father, inseparable from the source of all being. Every time the old voice arises, I am unworthy, I have failed, I am separate, meet it with the quiet truth. That is not I. I am the Christ, the child of the living God. Not with force, not with insistence, but with simple recognition. Let this recognition become your resting place. Let it become the home to which you return in moments of silence, in moments of fear, in moments of joy, in moments of doubt. For the presence within you is not intermittent. It is constant. It does not come and go. Your awareness of port, it comes and goes. And as you abide more frequently in this awareness, you will find that life takes on an entirely new character, lighter, freer, more peaceful, not because you have changed the world, but because you have awakened to the truth of the self that walks through it. Now let us enter, for these last moments, into a deep inner quiet, a silence in which all striving ceases and only being remains. Let us rest in the consciousness that God is the life of us, the mind of us, the soul of us. And as this truth settles into our awareness, let us feel the burden lift, the fear dissolve, the old identity fall away. For in this stillness, the Christ stands revealed not as something separate from you, but as the very essence of your being. Carry this awareness with you. Let it be the invisible mantle around your shoulders, the soft light in your heart, the steady foundation beneath your feet. Wherever you go, the presence goes. Whatever you do, the presence does. And as you live from this truth, You will find that your life becomes a quiet blessing to the world, not through effort, but through being. My friends, you have never been separate. You have never been alone. You have never been a sinner. You have always been and will forever be the beloved expression of the infinite. Rest in that truth, live in that truth, and let that truth live as you